Welcome to Martha's Stories. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. They didn't save me a chair. Not even a folding one. I stood at the edge of the reception hall, clutching a wrapped gift I bought with the last bit of my Social Security check, watching my granddaughter cut her wedding cake without glancing once in my direction. Her new husband kissed her cheek. People clapped. A jazz band played softly in the background. Someone popped champagne. And I stood there invisible. When I walked in late because no one sent me the updated time, one of the younger cousins whispered, "She actually came." Like I was some ghost they hadn't accounted for. No one greeted me. No one offered to take my coat. I didn't get a hug. Not from my son. Not from his wife. And certainly not from Emily, the bride. Just a single long stare from across the room. The kind people say for strangers who speak too loudly on buses. I had sewn the hem on Emily's first communion dress. Watched her while her parents vacationed in Cabo. Drove her to SAT prep classes twice a week for an entire summer. Now she was Mrs. Someone, standing next to a man I'd never met, surrounded by a family I didn't recognize anymore. I stayed by the wall beside a potted ficus, heart pounding louder than the bass from the speakers. At one point I tried to find a seat myself, just somewhere to rest my knees. I chose a half-empty table near the back. But as I pulled out a chair, a young man in a vest walked over. "Sorry, ma'am, this table is for the vendor team." Vendor? I wasn't even vendor tier. So I nodded, polite. Walked out into the hallway. Sat on a bench near the coat rack, the only place no one cared to monitor. My hand shook as I unwrapped the ribbon from the gift I'd brought. A handmade quilt with Emily and Michael's initials stitched in pale blue thread. I'd spent 6 months on it. Now I tucked it gently into the trash bin beside the bathroom door. Not out of anger. Just clarity. By the time I left, the wind had picked up. I stood on the sidewalk watching families pile into cars. Laughter. Photos. Warm arms around shoulders. I took the bus home. An hour later I was back in my apartment. The kettle whistled. My cat meowed. I sat in my usual chair, pulled a blanket over my lap and stared at the wall. They erased me. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just completely. And that was the moment I stopped pretending I still belonged. 3 weeks before the wedding my son called. That alone was suspicious. He only calls when he needs something. A document faxed, a childhood photo found. A casserole dropped off when Margot's sick. But that day his voice was unusually warm. "We'd really love to have you at the wedding, Mom," he said. "Emily asked if Grandma Louise was coming. She really wants you there." I remember pausing, dish towel in one hand, thinking it was odd Emily would ask. I hadn't seen her since Christmas 2 years ago, when she hugged me stiffly and spent the rest of the evening on her phone. Still I smiled. Foolish, soft. I told him I'd be there. He didn't offer to cover the flight, of course. I booked it myself. $287 round trip, the cheapest I could find with only one layover. I used the emergency envelope I'd been saving for a new furnace filter. The invitation arrived 4 days later. Not handwritten. A mass-printed glossy card with gold foil that caught the light just so. It listed the venue, the dress code, the curated dinner menu. But not my name. Just family of the groom. I told myself not to take it personally. That's what I do. I make excuses for people who don't even know I'm doing it. That week I went to the fabric store. I picked up soft ivory cotton, spent evenings hunched over my old Singer, piecing together squares from Emily's childhood, photos transferred onto fabric, lace from her old Easter dress, the monogrammed handkerchief her mother once gave me. The quilt took me 12 days. I wrapped it in brown paper, tied it with satin ribbon, and slid a card underneath. "For the next chapter of your life, stitched with love." The morning of my flight, I ironed my slacks, packed my best blouse, and applied lipstick I hadn't touched since my last doctor's appointment. I stared into the mirror for a long time trying to see what they saw. This outdated woman who used to be necessary. When I landed, no one was waiting. I sat on the airport bench for 40 minutes before texting my son. He replied 2 hours later. "Sorry, Mom. Everything's chaos. Just Uber to the hotel. We'll reimburse." They didn't. At the hotel, the front desk clerk couldn't find my reservation. I called my son again. No answer. Eventually, I paid for my own room. One queen bed, scratchy sheets, no view. The walls were thin, and I could hear someone crying through the vent. Maybe that should have been my cue, but I still believe they meant it. That somehow the seating chart was just a mistake. That when the music played and the lights dimmed, I'd be called to the table, offered a glass, welcomed. But I was the footnote to their headline, the polite inclusion they never intended to honor. And even then I kept holding on to softness, because it was all I had left. It was the breakfast that did it. The morning after the wedding, I came down to the hotel dining area at 8:06 a.m. I remember the time exactly because the eggs were already gone. Not a single one left. Just a tray of dry toast, 2 bruised bananas, and a silver urn of weak coffee that tasted like it had been brewed with dishwater. I sat at the far end of the room, where the light hit the table at an angle that reminded me of my old kitchen. A mother and daughter sat across the room laughing. The daughter leaned her head on her mother's shoulder, still wearing the afterglow of a perfect day. I stared at my toast. It crumbled too easily under the knife. My phone buzzed once. A photo from Margot, my daughter-in-law. It was Emily in her dress, standing in the sunlight with Michael. A perfect couple, all teeth and tan skin and promise. In the background you could see a sliver of the cake table. The quilt I'd made was nowhere to be seen. I zoomed in hoping, scanning for a corner, a thread, a hint. Nothing. I wrote a message. Did Emily get the quilt? I waited. 3 dots appeared, then vanished. No reply. So I called the front desk, asked if they'd seen a brown package left near the trash can. The woman was polite, confused. She checked. Nothing was turned in. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at the phone. I didn't eat the toast. I just folded the napkin over it and tucked it beneath the plate. Then I went back upstairs, changed out of my blouse, and laid on the stiff mattress, shoes still on. It was a strange kind of hurt. Not sharp but spreading. Like dye dropped in water. I kept thinking of the seating chart. The way no one looked surprised to see me standing. The way the table cards were printed so precisely, with such intention. As if they knew I was coming and made the choice anyway. Later that day, I bumped into my son in the lobby. He had his jacket slung over one shoulder and was talking to Michael about brunch plans. When he saw me, he blinked, hesitated. Then he said, "Hey, Mom." Like it was a question, not a greeting. I asked if he had a minute. He glanced at Michael, then at his watch. "We're kind of rushing. Can we talk later?" Later never came. That evening I packed early. My return flight was at noon the next day. But I couldn't bear the thought of one more silent meal or one more awkward hallway smile. I folded my clothes tighter than necessary, lining up the seams, pressing the fabric like it might answer for what they did. I found the envelope with the wedding card still tucked inside my suitcase, unopened. I had forgotten to give it. Or maybe I hadn't. Inside was a check. Not much, but enough. I stared at it. I could still give it to them. Still play the part. But something in me cracked then, quiet but final. A shift. Not out of bitterness, not yet, but something colder. Something truer. I slipped the check into the wastebasket beside the desk. I tore the envelope in two. Not dramatically. Just with precision. The next morning I left before dawn. No one saw me go. No one asked if I needed a ride. I rolled my suitcase past the front desk, where a young man nodded without looking up. At the airport I sat near gate 9 and watched the sun rise through the glass. It lit the horizon like a wound. That's when I knew. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't oversight. This was the start of being erased. 2 days after I returned home, my key didn't fit the mailbox. I jiggled it twice before realizing the truth. The lock had been changed. I stood on the cold concrete of my apartment building's entrance, holding a grocery bag in one hand and the useless key in the other. Inside the bag was soup mix, denture cleaner, and a lemon pound cake I hadn't intended to share with anyone. I just liked the idea of having something sweet in the house. My building manager, Roger, was outside with a clipboard, taking notes on the sprinkler system. I asked him what happened. He looked confused at first, then his face settled into something rehearsed. "Didn't your son tell you? He took over the lease. Said you were moving to Arizona." The sentence hit me like ice water down the back. I shook my head slowly, afraid to speak. Roger frowned. Said it was for health reasons. Said you wanted something quieter, drier. I managed a nod. Just enough to excuse myself without explanation. I left the bag on the stoop and walked to the bus stop, heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with stairs or sidewalks. I called my son. Straight to voicemail. The next day, I found out through the leasing office that my name had been removed from the lease 3 weeks prior. The form had been signed electronically. A forged signature. My signature. They used my old email. The one Emily helped me set up years ago, the one I hadn't checked in months. It was all there. Consent granted. Lease amendment processed. Forwarding address confirmed. Only I hadn't confirmed anything. And I certainly hadn't chosen Arizona. I emailed. I called. I even left a message with Margot. No answer. No apology. Not even a denial. Just silence. I went back to the building that evening, stood in the hallway outside what used to be my unit. Through the window I could see boxes stacked neatly. Emily's handwriting on the side of one. Winter sweaters. They were moving in. My son had given them my place. The apartment I'd lived in for 15 years. The one I chose after Harold died. The one with the windows that caught morning light just right in the winter, turning the kitchen into gold. It wasn't just betrayal. It was replacement. They didn't want me nearby. They wanted the space I left behind. I slept that night in a pay-by-the-week motel off Highway 8. The room smelled like mildew and cigarette ash, but the bed was firm and the TV worked. I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just stared at the ceiling and tried to understand how quickly a person could be erased from their own life. And still I kept thinking maybe there was some explanation. Maybe they meant well. Maybe they assumed I was too old to argue. But when I checked my bank account the next morning, the truth burned away the hope. There was a withdrawal. $4,200. Labeled home transition. My son had used my emergency savings, the account he once had access to for just in case, to help cover Emily's moving costs. I called the bank. Yes, the rep said. It was authorized. Same online PIN. Same verification. But I hadn't touched it. Not since Christmas. That was when I stopped calling. Stopped texting. Stopped pretending. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. Quiet. Painless for them. They didn't push me out the door. They simply took everything from under me and assumed I wouldn't notice. I used to think endings were loud. Slammed doors, shouted words, someone crying into a pillow. But the real ending came in a motel room, with silence, a plastic spoon, and powdered creamer. I'd been there 3 nights. Curtains drawn. TV on mute. The kind of place where no one knocks unless there's a problem. And still no one had called. Not my son. Not Margot. Not Emily. Not anyone. The apartment was gone. My name erased. My bank account raided. And yet somehow I kept waiting. As if one of them might remember I was still breathing. The laugh came without warning. Dry. Short. Almost pathetic. But it cracked something open. Something cold. They hadn't forgotten me. They just moved on. And I was the only one pretending this was still a misunderstanding. That morning I poured motel coffee, stared into the cup, and whispered it to myself. You are no longer useful. It wasn't said with anger. Just clarity. When I co-signed their loans, I was useful. When I paid for braces, babysat through fevers, brought soup during flus, I had a place. Purpose. Now, I was just noise in a life they'd already rewritten. I picked up the phone, called the bank, froze the joint account, opened a new one. My name only. Then the leasing office. Gave them a forwarding address, just AP. Oh, box for now. Last I walked to the library. Logged into a public computer and searched. Low-income senior housing near me. Half the listings were full. But one name stood out. Rosehaven Pines. No stairs. Small units. Income-based rent. A waiting list, but they were taking applications. I clicked apply. As I typed in my name, I stopped shaking. Not because I wasn't scared, but because I was finally doing something for me. By 3 o'clock, the application was submitted. By 4, I was sitting on the curb with my motel coffee cooling in my hand, watching the sun dip behind a used tire shop. They could keep their silence, their dining chairs, their seating charts. I wasn't asking for space anymore. I'd make my own. I left without telling a soul. No note. No message. No dramatic exit. Just a suitcase with wheels that squeaked slightly when I crossed the motel parking lot, and the quiet resolve of someone who had finally stopped waiting for permission. The morning was overcast. Not raining, not yet, but heavy with the promise of it. I walked to the bus stop 2 blocks down. No one watched. No one asked where I was going. It was fitting. I rode downtown, then transferred to the northbound route that passed Rosehaven Pines. I'd called the manager that morning. Miriam Warmvoice said she'd meet me for a walkthrough. She didn't ask why I was interested. Just said, "We don't get many people who come see it before they're desperate." That's a good sign. The building wasn't pretty. Beige siding. Cracks in the sidewalk. But it was quiet. No kids screaming. No leaf blowers. Just the faint chirp of a radio through one open window and wind moving gently through the trees. Miriam met me at the entrance. Short haircut. Clean jacket. Eyes that had seen too much and still looked straight at you. She didn't give a tour. Just handed me the key to Unit 103 and said, "Take your time." It was small. Studio style. A kitchenette, a window that faced the garden, a twin bed with plastic still on the mattress. But the air was clean. The silence comfortable. And for the first time in months, no one's things were in the way. No one's expectations. I stood in the middle of the room, both hands still gripping the suitcase handle. And I felt it settle. This was mine. Not a favor. Not borrowed. Not shared. Mine. When I stepped back out, Miriam asked if I wanted to be added to the list. I said yes. She told me the wait could be 6 weeks. I nodded. I could wait a little longer for something that was finally mine. That afternoon I checked out of the motel. Walked across town to a weekly rental studio above a closed-down salon. No one greeted me. Just a keypad and a laminated sheet of rules on the wall. It was quiet. Stark. But it gave me what I needed: time. That night I made soup on a single burner. Ate it from a paper bowl. My phone buzzed only once. A message from my son. "Haven't heard from you. Everything okay?" No apology. No mention of the apartment. No offer to meet. Just the kind of message people send when they're afraid of what silence might mean. I didn't answer. Let him wonder. Let them all sit in the quiet they built around me. I was already walking out of it. The first day I didn't respond, it felt like revenge. By the third, it felt like peace. I turned off my phone. Left it face down on the counter next to the motel microwave, still dusty from whoever had warmed something before me. I didn't charge it. I didn't check it. I let it die slowly, the way I'd let the version of myself they knew fade out. They started to notice. Or maybe just got nervous. A string of texts came in that first week. First from my son. Then Margot. Even Emily. Each one shorter than the last. "Mom, where are you? Can we talk? Please just let us know you're okay." Not once did anyone ask why I'd gone quiet. Not one word about the apartment. The forged signature. The emptied account. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about losing the version of me that absorbed everything without consequence. I sat by the window most mornings with instant coffee and an old paperback. Watching the street below. Watching the world continue without me in it. For once, I wasn't racing to stay relevant. I was just still. And in that stillness, I remembered who I used to be. Before the favors. Before the babysitting. Before I was reduced to "Mom, can you?" There was a woman who used to read novels in full. Who gardened. Who baked pies for pleasure, not for obligation. Who liked old jazz records and crossword puzzles, and talking to strangers in checkout lines. I started going to the library again. Sat at the table by the large window where the sun always fell across the tile just right. No one there knew me. No one expected anything. I started a list in a small notebook. Things that are still mine. I wrote down my name. My birthday. The smell of nutmeg. The sound of rain on glass. The feel of warm laundry against cold hands. Every small thing they hadn't taken. By week 2 the calls stopped. Maybe they assumed I was punishing them. Maybe they told themselves I was being dramatic. That I'd come back once I cooled off. But there was no anger left to cool. There was only space now. Space I'd never had in their world. Space to think. To breathe. To reclaim. Sometimes I'd sit at the bus stop near the salon and watch people go by. Rushing to jobs, to appointments, to families. No one looked at me. And I liked it. There's power in being unseen when you choose it. When I walked past a mother yelling into her phone, dragging a toddler behind her, I didn't feel envy or nostalgia. I felt relief. That life was no longer mine. That weight wasn't mine to carry. Not anymore. I'd spent years being the net beneath their feet. Now I was simply walking away from the circus. The envelope was smaller than I remembered. Cream-colored. Heavy paper. The kind they don't make anymore. I pulled it from the file folder at the bottom of my suitcase. The folder I hadn't touched since Harold died. Inside were 3 things. A copy of my will, a savings account statement from 5 years ago, and a business card. The card read, Eleanor Marsh, estate planning attorney. I hadn't spoken to her in over a decade, but the number still worked. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was older now, slower but still sharp. I told her I needed to update everything. No, I wasn't in a hospital. No, this wasn't urgent. But it was important. She didn't ask questions. Just gave me a date and told me to bring ID. The appointment was set for Thursday. I spent the next 3 days sorting through every old statement, insurance file, and piece of paperwork I still had access to. I was meticulous. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted control. If they had erased me from their lives, I would do the same with ink, not silence. When I arrived at Eleanor's office, I wore my best blouse. Ironed. Clean. No perfume. I looked like a woman who still made decisions, not someone waiting to fade out. She looked over my old will, then asked gently, "You're sure?" I nodded. Every cent I had left would be placed into a trust. Not for my son. Not for Emily. Not for anyone who had looked through me like a ghost at her own wedding. The new beneficiary would be a foundation, one I used to donate to in Harold's name. They provided scholarships for adult women returning to school. Women who had been left behind. Forgotten. Rewritten. Like me. I asked her to remove all prior beneficiaries. Permanently. I added a clause. No access until death. No contesting. No appeals. Eleanor didn't flinch. Just nodded and kept writing. When we finished, she handed me a copy in a thick envelope. It felt heavier than I expected. That night, I sat at the kitchen table in the rental studio and laid it beside me. I made tea. I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For once, my name was on something they couldn't steal. They had taken my place at the table. I had taken their place in my plans. Let them wonder. Let them dig through old voicemail boxes looking for answers I'd never leave. This wasn't punishment. This was preservation. They had made me invisible. So now I'd make myself untouchable. It started with the voicemail. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Emily's been asking about you." I let it sit. 3 days later, another one. Longer this time. More carefully worded. "We were thinking maybe we could have dinner sometime. Talk. No pressure." They still didn't ask where I'd been. They didn't mention the apartment, the forged signature, the drained account. They asked if I was free next weekend. The timing was too perfect. A week had passed since I updated the will. The copy had been sent certified. I knew the envelope had arrived. I had the tracking number. They knew. Now they were circling. Not because they missed me, but because they'd realized I was no longer holding space for them. No longer tethered to their lives by obligation or habit. That's when Margot called. I didn't answer. Then a text came. "Please. We were wrong. Just come over. Let's talk." I read it. Didn't reply. There was no apology. No ownership. Just the soft panic of people realizing the ground was no longer beneath them. That week I walked to Rosehaven Pines. Miriam met me at the front desk, holding a clipboard and smiling like someone who just finished a long, hard day but still had room for kindness. "We had an early move out," she said. "Unit 106. Gardenside. If you want it, it's yours." I signed the lease the same day. I didn't need help moving. I had 2 boxes, 1 suitcase, and my own 2 hands. The walls were thin, and the heater groaned when it kicked on, but it was mine. The first night, I lit a candle on the kitchen counter and sat at the little table by the window. Outside, the garden was quiet. Someone had planted tulips. I watched them bend slightly in the wind. My phone buzzed again. Another message. Longer. This one from Emily. "Grandma, I don't know what happened. But I want to see you. Please. Can we talk? I miss you. She sounded young in that message. Too young to carry what her parents had done. But she wasn't too young to notice what had shifted. I didn't block her. I didn't respond either. Not because I wanted her to hurt, but because I'd stopped chasing moments that only bloomed when someone else felt the absence of what they took for granted. I let the phone go dark again. The tulips swayed. The heater rumbled. The room held its quiet. It didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a boundary. The kind that doesn't come with yelling or door slams. Just silence. And a door that doesn't open anymore. My mornings are quieter now. No footsteps above my head. No slammed cabinet doors. No one asking for rides or favors or last-minute child pickups. Just the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic as I stir my tea. The radio low in the background playing old standards. At Rosehaven Pines, people mind their own lives. Some of us garden. Some walk laps around the courtyard. Some just sit like I do on the bench near the fountain and watch the sky change. Peace looks different when you fought for it. The first month I didn't unpack the photo. The one of Emily's second birthday. I wasn't ready. But now it sits on the shelf above the kettle. Not as a reminder of pain but as proof I was there. That I loved. That I tried. I see her face sometimes in the garden beds. Young women visiting older neighbors, staff members checking in. I wonder if she'll ever show up here. But I don't expect it. I've stopped expecting anything from people who proved they were never truly holding me. I saw a card slip under my door last Thursday. No return address. No signature. Just a short line in familiar handwriting. We're sorry. Please let us back in. I tore it in half. Not out of hate, but because I'd finally learned. Letting someone back in isn't kindness if they only knock when they're locked out of your will. The last box I unpacked held Harold's sweater. Still folded. Still smelling faintly of cedar. I placed it in the drawer next to my own scarf. He would have been proud of me. Not because I left, but because I stayed gone. Because I stopped proving my worth to people who only valued it in crisis. Sometimes I walk to the community room and sit by the window with my book. Sometimes I chat with Ruth, who lost her husband last winter, or Harold, the other Harold, who grows tomatoes in plastic tubs. And sometimes I say nothing at all. Just sip my tea. Watch the light fall across the tiles. And breathe. There's no dramatic finish. No apology scene. No reunion hug. Just a woman warm in her own skin again, surrounded by quiet. They might talk about me one day. Ask where I went. Wonder why I disappeared. Some might say I was too proud. Too sensitive. Too old-fashioned. But they won't say I begged. They won't say I returned. They'll say I vanished. But the truth is simpler. I just stopped answering the door. And sometimes family is just a word for people you no longer let in. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.